Once again, welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. What to know about your Portugal paddling adventure with Expedition Leader Nancy Moore, Head of Field Staff Renata Haas, and Editorial Director Wendy Redal. Ladies, thank you all so much for being here with us today. Renata, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Colby. And I am so excited to take some time to talk about what our Portugal adventure is all about. Today, we are going to be diving deep into this trip, and we have Miss Nancy Moore and Wendy Redal with us to help talk about the experience, the main components of the trip that we really need to make sure we are thinking about if you are traveling on this adventure, or you're planning on traveling on this adventure, and just what the experience feels like if it's something that you're thinking about. So first and foremost, I'd like to take a second and have Nancy introduce herself.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm really thrilled to have you here. I have been the expedition leader on this trip to Portugal for now 20 years, and I've continued to lead this trip because I'm over the top passionate about Portugal and about this trip in particular, and have fallen in love with the country and the people of the country and the culture. My day job, if you will, when I'm not guiding, is that I am run my own consulting business in conservation, so particularly land and water conservation, and that practice is a national practice. And then I also wear another hat as an elected official in my hometown of Monona, Wisconsin. Originally from New England, but I now live in the Midwest.
Thanks so much, Nancy. And we are so pleased to have Wendy, who works with us at Nat Hab and has been on this trip specifically to offer her insight. But Nancy, please, or excuse me, Wendy, please introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Well, I am just delighted to get to participate in our conversation today, because not only of the Nat Hab trips that I've had the good fortune to go on, but of any trips I've ever taken, this is one of my absolute favorites, and I'm just excited to share about it. I have been full-time with Nat Hab for, gosh, I'm coming up on 10 years in September, and as editorial director, I'm sort of the head writer and editor for the company, work in the marketing department, try to make our trips sound as enticing as they truly are. And this particular trip doesn't need a lot of help in that regard, because it just is such an amazing experience on its own terms. So we'll be excited to fill you in on all the details about this wonderful adventure.
Thanks so much, Wendy. We are so happy to have you both on this webinar today. And my name is Renata. I have been with Nat Hab for, I believe, a little bit over 7 years. I'm on our operations team, oversee all of our field staff and expedition leaders around the globe, and then also have been overseeing our COVID protocol task force over the past 18 months or so. So we have been running trips since last July, all over the world at this point, from Yellowstone to Kenya, Tanzania, the Galapagos, Costa Rica, and we are so excited to start our Portugal trips up quite soon. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of Portugal, because traveling amidst COVID is something that everyone has questions about, I did want to take some time and talk about the COVID protocol that Nat Hab has in place, our requirements, and how that protocol was developed, just to give those who are traveling to Portugal a little bit more background information, and those who are thinking about it the same, so that you can make a decision on if you would like to travel, given the amount of work that we've put in on these protocols. So again, we've been traveling since last July, and these protocols took a team to put together. We have taken a multi-step perspective of creating these protocols and rely heavily on guidance from the CDC and WHO. We, to develop the skeleton for these protocols, we looked at their guidance and looked how it might impact every single component of our trip before we created that skeleton document. We then made sure that we were not just creating our protocols in a vacuum. We collaborated with other experts within the adventure and outdoor travel industry so that we could share best practices, exchange ideas, and see what else was going on within the industry. It was also very important when creating these protocols that we had a procedure in place to vet all of our partners that we work with worldwide. So that includes our hotels, our activity partners, our transportation providers, other restaurants that you go to. So every partner that we work with across the globe is vetted by us, and we ensure that they meet our standards for operating amidst COVID. After figuring out how to vet all of our partners around the world, we also think it is incredibly important to make sure that we are screening everyone that travels on our trip. So we do have a health questionnaire that guests fill out before they travel and once they arrive on day one. And if someone was to, let's say, develop symptoms on trip or just in general not feel very well, we also rely on virtual physicians that we are able to reach out to and ask for guidance on next steps. So we have virtual doctors that can complete those health assessments. We also have intensive training for all of our guides in the field that are going to be leading trips and staff that are going to be on trips. So before every season starts, there is an in-depth training that focuses specifically on our COVID protocols and how those are to be implemented in the field. And we make sure we do those before each specific season so that we can adjust to any changes that need to be made as we've been going through this whole process. And then we really make sure that we are taking the time to set clear expectations with our guests and our partners in the field on how what we're expecting for the following of our protocols. So it's taking quite a bit of time. We are seeing everyone in the world begin to travel more frequently globally. So we've also wanted to make sure that we prepare our guests to mitigate their risk before they even leave the house. So any guest that travels with us, when they get their pre-departure briefing and itinerary, what they also get is hand sanitizer, 2 KN95 masks, alcohol wipes, and information on how they can mitigate their risk when they're traveling. So we are taking this incredibly seriously. There's another component that we get a lot of questions about, and that is how we manage testing, and vaccinations. We do require that our guests that are 12-year-olds and older be fully vaccinated. That's that second shot or first shot if it's Johnson & Johnson, plus 14 days prior to the start of your trip. And we've done this to mitigate the risk of the spread of COVID to our guests, to our guides, and to the local communities that we visit. And then for Portugal itself, Portugal does require everyone to be tested prior to arriving. If you are traveling with us, you'll receive information on the details of the timing for that prior to your trip. And then if you are traveling with us, the US currently requires anyone traveling back to the US to be tested. We are aware of that, and on our trips, we actually facilitate that process of getting tested. So you don't have to really take any additional thought to how you're going to get tested, where you're going to get tested. Nat Hab facilitates all of that for you, so that you can get your test results back and then head back home after the trip is completed. And then another layer of our protocols is what we call the combination intervention approach. And we've all heard quite a bit about the Delta variant and the surge of the Delta variant, which is why we continue to utilize this combination of intervention approach. These set of controls are also effective in mitigating the spread of the Delta variant of COVID as well. So along with testing and vaccines, we also require respiratory hygiene, so that's wearing a mask when we are inside, following local regulations. That is hand sanitation on trip, enhanced sanitation of high touch surfaces, and also physical distancing. So Nat Hab is in a lucky space because we have also very small groups. So because of our small group size, that does mean that it is quite easy to spread out. It is easier to find locations to travel to and where we take our trips that allow for more space and more time outside, which is an incredibly large benefit. So with that said, I want to move from all things COVID to taking some time and talking about our Portugal adventure. So first, I want to start with Wendy. And as someone who's traveled to Portugal before, I have not had the gift of being there yet. Please tell me what you love about this itinerary and this place.
Okay, great, with pleasure. Well, I love Europe and have traveled extensively there in a variety of countries. And I think of all the experiences I've had in Europe, nothing has matched this particular trip and this itinerary for offering an experience that very, very few travelers will ever have the opportunity to get, because it's a trip that, well, Nancy will tell you more about this, but it's been crafted in a very personal way, based on personal connections that our company has had for over 20 years. And so I work in marketing and communications, and you often see brochures that use words like authentic and unique and intimate. And I can tell you that this trip fulfills that to the nth degree. It's a highly personalized trip. Our hosts at the places that we stay, the wineries we visit, are they've often been families that have been involved for hundreds of years and going way back, or at least decades. Personal relationships, small scale, and also it's a very interesting combination of natural beauty and peace and serenity and nature, not a big wildlife trip, but just glorious natural beauty coupled with fantastic culture, food, wine, and like I have sometimes hear our company president, Ben Bressler, say, well, first and foremost, from the get-go, we are a nature travel company, which is the case for sure, but it doesn't mean that nature travelers don't also like really wonderful, unique, and interesting accommodations or food and certainly wine experiences. And here it's a really farm-to-table kind of experience. We'll tell you more about that as the webinar goes on. But just a chance to see a slice of old world Europe that is increasingly hard to find, and especially hard to find on a standard trip. So like, for example, one of the villages we stay in, Felgar, what I remember was walking out early one morning and seeing a man holding his donkey and leading his donkey to the town well for a drink, and a woman who was an older woman, widowed, all head to toe in black, still waiting for a small local bus. Just scenes that you just don't see very often in very many places. So it's peaceful, it's beautiful, it's amazing food, wine, and hospitality in a combination that's obviously left a big impact on me.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Nancy, what about you?
Sure. So I like to say that the wildlife of this trip is my Portuguese brothers that I work with on this trip. And I've had the good fortune of working with for the last 20 years as well. I started this trip 20 years ago, and actually about a week after 9/11. I was one of the first people to leave the United States. And what struck me then and continues to enrich me every time I go is the incredible warmth of the Portuguese people and of this valley, and just the incredibly rich history. As you can imagine, as I know all of us after an event like that, not to mention after events like COVID, we all seek nature, I think, even more so than enduring COVID, even more so. And so landing in Portugal and starting to get to know the Portuguese people and building those relationships over the last 20 years, all of which really served us well on this trip. You know, my daytime job in consulting is all about continuous improvement in organizations. And so anytime we can tweak this trip and make it even better, when it's already in many respects a spectacular trip, and I look forward to sharing more about it, we do so. And so I would say the warmth of the people, the culture, the rich history, and yeah, as you can see from the pictures here, and certainly the relationships that we've built and continue to build and continue to tap into as we're over there. I mean, this trip has, safe to say, every single day this trip has multiple wow experiences in it, and yet we're always looking to tap a few more of those wows.
Yeah. I forgot to add one other thing that left a big impression on me too, is that in my group, we saw no other American travelers outside of Porto on the whole trip. And in fact, very few tourists at all once we got up to the upper section of the river beyond where the riverboat cruises go. And it's just a truly, you're just away from everything. And it's a really unusual travel opportunity that is just not open. Like, we're the only ones that do it. Yeah, literally. So
thank you so much for that, guys. I love the fact that we have still been able to continue this itinerary for so many years, and that it still feels so incredibly intimate, even though it seems that the rest of the world places just seem to keep getting busier and busier. Well, what I want to take some time and talk about next is just chatting a little bit about where this itinerary goes before we get into the nitty-gritty about what we need to prepare for it. So Nancy, do you want to tell us a little bit about the flow and locations that we visit on this itinerary?
Absolutely. So we start in the city of Porto, and we where we do a small tour of Porto and have our opening dinner, and then we very quickly move upriver, as Wendy pointed out, to a part of the river that most people don't get to. If you look on this map, you'll see the very blue line that goes from Porto to a little town called Pinhao, the very first blue line. Most people that go to the Douro Valley, if they get upriver at all, they only get to Pinhao, which is the heart of the region. They don't go beyond Pinhao. We spend all of our time, as you can see from all of the arrows and icons, we spend all of our time above Pinhao. And so we largely have the river to ourselves as we're paddling. We have accommodations to ourselves where we're staying. We have walks by ourselves when we're walking. We're eating as a group together the whole time. It's not to say we don't occasionally visit a restaurant or two, but it's really, we have the river, as I said, all to ourselves. Going all the way up by train up to the Portuguese Spanish border to start, which is essentially where we start the trip. And then we work our way downriver over the course of the week, sometimes in contiguous segments of the river, and in other times skipping some segments of the river as we go. I like to call this, I coined this my favorite float and bloat a few years ago, because we use the kayaking as an excuse to be able to drink fabulous wines and eat fabulous food, or at least justify being able to eat fabulous food and drink fabulous wine in the evening. So that's really the gist of the trip, is going through this gorgeous valley, which in and of itself is a UNESCO heritage site, the oldest demarcated wine region in the world.
Sounds incredible. Thank you for that explanation of the itinerary. So before I think about traveling and I have my trip, I know where I'm going, the first thing that I usually think about and then panic about and then think about some more and then do a lot of Googling is understanding what I need to pack for the trip. And any traveler that goes on our trip does get a pre-departure briefing with the packing list outlined, but I feel that even when I read those, you have to digest all of that information, and then there are still some things where you're like, should I bring this, should I not bring this? So Nancy, I wanted to get your thoughts on the main things that we need to be bringing on our Portugal adventure, and what we might need to expect in regards to weather as well as we think about packing. Excuse me.
Did she freeze?
We might have had Nancy freeze. Well, while Nancy is
She'll come back.
popping back on. Wendy, since you've been on this trip, we can start with you, and maybe if you want to go into some of the main, definitely bring these items with you components for this
Right,
trip.
sure, yeah. So this trip, it kind of involves packing for a couple different scenarios. One is the active components when we're in the kayaks and doing some country walks and hikes in the countryside. As you can see from the photo here, a lot of the folks in this picture have those heavy duty kind of protective water sandals on, like Keens or Tevas, which you can wear in and out of the water. And we do ask that when you're in the kayaks, you do have footwear on like this, a good hard, rubber soled sandal, like a Keen sandal, which can function for walks and hikes as well as in and out of the water. So just good all-purpose water footwear, and then quick dry clothing. A lot of the folks in the picture here have either like nylon shorts or those pants that go just below the knee, which are nice when you're in the kayak because they will protect your upper legs from the sun, and the sun is strong. And when you're on the river, it's kind of a combination of having comfortable clothes. Like for me, I pretty much every day I was in like a swimsuit top and then a shirt, like a long sleeve shirt that was maybe a UV treated ex officio type lightweight nylon shirt that I could put over if I felt like I was maybe getting a little too much sun. But for the most part, I just love being out there in a stretchy tank top or a swimsuit top while we were paddling. And again, shorts or some kind of a nylon pant below the knee, but it is warm. And so you want to have that combination of sun protection and also being comfortable and cool. The hikes, same thing, shorts, just a day hiker or a heavy duty sandal. We don't really do anything on rugged trails at all. They're most are like what you see in the picture here. We're walking through vineyards and orchards, through small towns and villages. So nothing too strenuous and nothing that requires any kind of technical foot gear. However, when we put aside our active adventures and it's time to head up into the hills to our beautiful accommodations and these lovely historic inns in a number of places where we stay and settle in and have some wine and then sit down for dinner, often outdoors on a patio. Europeans tend to dress up a little bit more for dinner, and nothing is fancy, but it is nice to be able to put on maybe a sundress, or if you're a gentleman, a pair of khakis and a button-up short sleeve shirt, just to spruce up a little bit for dinner, or occasionally, if we're at a winery enjoying a tasting or something like that when we're off the river. A couple of other things that came in very handy for me that I would specifically recommend. a pair of kayaking gloves. And these are where, you know, your fingers stick out, but they cover your hands when you're paddling gloves, because you are going to get some water that drips down your paddle and your hands can get kind of wet. And you don't want your hands to be slipping when you're managing your paddle. So I found kayaking gloves to be one of the best things that I brought, and I was really happy I had those. Another thing that I would recommend that you see some of the folks in this picture wearing is a brimmed hat, and ideally one with a little string, because every once in a while we'll get some winds that blow into our faces from the coast, and they're blowing upriver. Usually the winds aren't real strong, but it just is helpful to keep your hat on. And then the other nice thing is you can take your hat and dip it in the river, fill it up, and then just put it on and let it drip all over you if it's feeling a little warm and toasty outside. So that's a nice way to cool off. A baseball cap will do the same thing, but it's also important, I think, to have some sun protection on the back of your neck. So if you do prefer more of a baseball cap type hat, if you look at the photo here, the person who's the third one in from the right, he's got a brimmed baseball hat, but then it's got the what do you call it? Like the, you know, the part that comes,
ear and neck protection.
Cover that comes down the back that you can either pin up or you can unfurl it and have it cover your ears and your neck. So just comfort, coolness, sun protection when you're on the water or when you're hiking, and then just something a little nicer to go ashore, get into your room, shower off and freshen up and enjoy a special dinner with. So, but nothing's really fancy. So no need to worry about that. There she is.
And we've got Nancy.
Sorry, you know, I don't have to tell you all or the travelers on this email that, you know, when you're in a small town in the middle of with limited limits, sometimes the connections, the computer connections go awry. So I apologize. What a great shot.
Well, Wendy did a phenomenal job of covering the packing list. I love that this trip goes from active day to dressing up a little bit for the evening. So it's good trip to be able to pack for, and you're not backpacking, so you don't have to carry it on your back like I would normally do through Europe. So I think it was a fantastic description. So you've given me this information. I have packed my bags, and now I am headed to the airport and to Portugal. So I want to take about a minute or two. Nancy, tell us what the arrival feels like and any important information that guests should know.
Sure. So this is the airport in Porto, and this would be one of two ways to get to this trip in Porto. One being the airport, and the other being the train, which we'll talk about as well. This airport, Porto in total is about the Porto area, greater Porto area is about 1.5 million in terms of its overall population. And the airport is super well laid out, easy to find your way around. Through customs, walk through customs, which is very simple. Right on the other side of the customs, you'll see the meet and greet area, and you'll see myself or Vitor Pedro, my Portuguese brothers, as I like to refer to them, my brothers from a different mother. One of us will be there with our Nat Hab signs welcoming you. So look for the Nat Hab signs right as you come out of customs in that meet and greet area, and we can head right from there to the excuse me to the parking lot. There is an exchange here. Excuse me, for money. There is an exchange here, but it's not mandatory that you get it at the airport if you haven't gotten euros already. There's also ATMs right by the hotel where we stay the first night, and right in town Porto, as well as, frankly, at the train station where we leave the next morning to go upriver. This is another train station.
Uh-oh.
Nancy, we've lost your audio for a second, so I'll fill in as.
Okay, I think I've got it
Oh,
back.
you're back.
All right.
You're back. We got you.
This is the other train station. This is Campanhã, the train station that you'll use if you came up from Lisbon or from some other part of Europe or other part of Portugal. This is where you would come in. And we would pick you up there. Same deal. As soon as you get off the train, you'll see us there with our natural habitat signs. It's a terrific thing if you, well, we're pretty good, I have to say, at picking out the Americans and those people who are Nat Hab travelers. You know, certainly having your luggage tags on your luggage is a tremendous help, whether you're coming by train or coming by plane. And both this train station, Campanhã, and the airport is an easy drive to our hotel the first night that we stay in Fonte Sagres.
Fantastic.
So that's
Thank
an easy airport, easy experience, and same thing with the train station.
It's so nice to know that you're going to have an easy arrival experience. I know from personal travels to areas like Kathmandu or Kilimanjaro Airport, those airports can feel overwhelming, and it's just nice to know if you can read signs in English, someone's easily identifiable, makes the start of the journey so much easier to sort of transition into vacation mode. So we've talked about arriving, what that process is like. I want to take a minute or so to talk about the different modes of transportation that we are going to use on this trip. Nat Hab is definitely not a big bus tour company. We travel a little bit differently. So Nancy, tell us a little bit more about how we're going to be getting from point A to point B.
Sure. So, well, point A being Porto. When we start in Porto, the first thing we do at the very beginning of the trip, the first morning of the trip, if you will, is hop on a regional train to head upriver, as I said, up to the Portuguese Spanish border. And the train experience in and of itself is quite unique. Excuse me. And then the rest of the week, we're transiting in two vans. You just showed a picture of one of them, Renata, and they're new within the last couple of years. And we travel in two vans specifically so that we have room. As I'm sure many people know, this trip has a maximum of 12 people. And so that gives us enough room for all of our gear and our luggage when necessary, and for people to be able to spread out a little bit in the van and not be crammed up in the vans. And they're very comfortable vans, all with you know, all windowed on the side, so you can see what we're rolling through. And there's generally commentary from myself as well as from my brothers, Pedro and Vitor, as we're rolling through, so you know what we're rolling through. And every morning we're heading out essentially wherever we're staying. We're heading out in the morning in those vans, sometimes with the kayaks, most often with the kayaks, driving across a gorgeous plateau and dropping down considerable height down to the riverbanks. This is a major valley, so we're driving down to the river where we can launch the boats or meet the boats. And then at the end of the day, when we're done with our activities, and it's not just kayaking, but when we're done with the activities, same thing, we're piling into the vans and heading back to our accommodation for that night. So in addition to the train and the vans, of course, we have the kayaking. And I happen to be a certified kayaking instructor, in addition to being a guide. And one of the things that I love to do on this trip is to teach people how to kayak, or even coach people that think they know how to kayak, or they want some extra pointers along the way. So right off the bat, we want to make sure that people are comfortable on the river as we're paddling, and so it's just a terrific way to see this part of the world.
Fantastic. I love that we're moving around in such intimate vehicles. So the next thing I want to jump into, is the accommodation on this trip. Now, every once in a while, we have to, if we're going into more remote areas where the accommodation might be a little bit lackluster, we will have to take some time and talk to guests about why we're staying in those accommodations that might not have AC or be a little bit more rugged. But this is a little bit of a different trip. And it looks like the accommodation in Portugal is a little bit, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 steps up from a little bit rugged. So Nancy, if you want to take a minute and talk a little bit about the accommodation we can expect in our
this
Portugal.
doesn't look real rugged, does it, Renata? Yeah, there's no roughing it here. You know, Olaf Mulver used to say, well, this is the cushiest trip we have. And I was like, sure is. Any problem with that? This is the opening hotel, Hotel Infante Sagres. It's one of the world's finest hotels. Literally has been, you know, in some of you may be familiar with the ranking of the old hotels, world's finest old hotels, and this has been in that book for years, and it's also been restored. Very recently, renovated very recently. They shut down and renovated the entire thing. It's an exquisite hotel. It's right in the center of the town, in the center of Porto, that was named a UNESCO heritage site years ago. So it's very convenient to wander around town. I would certainly recommend that people come a few days early for this trip. A, because you will experience some jet lag, and B, because Porto is a fantastic city and it just gets better all the time. So to spend a couple of extra days in Porto or down in Lisbon and then come up, either one works. Excuse me, I also have a cold, so
it sounds like the accommodation just gets better and more intimate as we continue down the trip.
That's right. So as we continue, once we get upriver, this is the first place we stay, Casa Santa Cruz. It's an old farmhouse, literally no roof, caved in walls, and it's been lovingly restored and again renovated by our friends Anna and George, and they just have done an exquisite job. Every single accommodation upriver that we stay in, we're the only ones there. There might be one other guest, but almost all the time this is Casa del Voyage, or sorry, this is Barrio do Gazal. Again, all family run, all lovingly restored. This is old schist buildings that have been transformed into hotel rooms, all in a row in this beautiful little town in Mursa. This is Casa de Casa de la Voyage, and atop a mountain. It's the last place we stay. Again, family run and operated, absolutely exquisite. This particular Casa was noted by BBC as having one of the most beautiful views of the in the world, because it looks right down on the river, and it's a great way to finish up our time on the river. So every accommodation, absolutely fantastic, and chosen, as you can tell from these pictures, very, very different, right? Each one, some of them are very modern, some of them are have a lot of antiques, and then you have in the middle with Barrio do Gazal, you have little schist houses, kind of individual houses. So we've intentionally mixed it up that way. So our accommodations too tell a story of the valley.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And Wendy, as you've gone on this trip, was there anything you found about not knowing what you were going to expect, being surprised about, or that you were most excited about from the accommodation on our trip?
I did not expect necessarily that the accommodations would end up being one of the highlights on a par with everything else about the trip. And just the diversity, the intimacy, the artistry, the hospitality, so personalized from the hosts, at every turn, it just added that extra layer to a trip that was already great. And so, for example, like in Casa de Santa Cruz, that's the one that was in the little village of Felgar, where I saw the man leading the donkey to the well just outside across the street. And what I really enjoyed was hearing about the restoration of the house. So when our group arrived, they gave us a little tour and talked about, how they took this, what is it, Nancy, 400 years old, 17th century, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
house.
absolutely, 17th century,
Yeah,
yeah.
and have turned it into this, preserving the heritage, but with lots of really cool contemporary touches and artistry and design, flair, and just impressive. And getting to hear from staff and hosts about how this has happened. And also the one that you mentioned at the end, toward the end of the trip, the Casa de Casal de Loivos. The view from up there, oh my gosh, that the BBC acclaimed. I mean, we must have been 1,200 feet at least, I would think, above the Douro River, and way up high on little tiny windy village streets. You come up to the inn and you're like, oh my goodness, this is where we're staying. And it seems like a lovely, elegant private home. And you walk in and then you get out onto the terrace outside where we had our dinner, overlooking the river and the vineyards and the orchards, and then just, stepping out the front door, and there was a tree with just brimming with ripe figs when I was there in September, and you could just pluck a fig off the tree and pop it in your mouth. And it just was a surprise at every turn, I felt, with the accommodations.
And, I should add to that, Wendy, that we always try to, as you know, we always try to create additional surprises, right? And in part because we have the relationships we do. I can give you a few other examples of like things that, we will arrive at our Casa on a Cruz, and we'll learn.
Oh, we lost your voice again, Nancy. Darn it.
So, there's going to be a festival, and so it's like, oh my gosh, great, we get to dance with all the locals.
Yeah.
and and literally, there's a local marching band that comes in, and then there's a band that comes in later, and people are dancing in the streets, and we're part of it because we happen to be there. And we might be able to go to our artisan cheese factory. We've done that before because that came up. The first time we showed up at Barrio do Gazal, the two women that own Barrio do Gazal had let the town know that we were coming, and Mursa is only about 500 people now. Well, they pulled out all the stops in their piazza in the center of town and did a barbecue for us to welcome us to town. I mean, it's not, again, it's the authenticity and the warmth that we were talking about earlier, that happens at every turn, and we try to take, we're always got our ear to the ground.
Yeah. It's like one with friends. Yeah.
Looking for those opportunities.
Having such small groups and being in such intimate locations does allow for such a more in-depth exploration, and that's what I do love about natural habitat. I'm going to take a second, and before we head to activities, talk briefly about food on this trip. There is a saying that you'll never go hungry on a Nat Hab trip, and it sounds like this trip is same goes for Portugal. We can handle pretty much all dietary needs on our programs as long as we know about them in advance, and we have a incredible diverse locations where we do stop for food during the trip. And yes, as long as we know about your dietary restrictions in advance, we can manage them. Nancy, is there anything else you wanted to add about the food or locations where we eat on this program?
I would say that the food is the only thing we've gotten complaints about, and that those complaints are only about one thing, which is that there's too much of it. and people can't stop eating because it's so good. So in truth, I always caution people in the beginning of the trip that they don't have to adhere to what their mother might have said when they were younger, that they had to clean their plate, because the food and wine and port is always flowing, and it's just exquisite. Very Mediterranean based, as you might imagine. This part, lots of garlic, lots of olive oil. My foodie friends, of which pretty much is my entire friend group here in the United States, say, you know, don't bring me, I mean, I love the Portuguese wine. The Portuguese wine is fantastic, but bring home the olive oil.
Yeah, yeah, so
Right?
good. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And then all the unexpected things that I found to be wonderful food surprises too, in addition to the, you know, home cooked entrees like the pork stew and the roasted vegetables and the fresh seafood, but were some of the things that I remember on the breakfast table too. Well, fresh baked bread just about everywhere, but then also products that were from the farms in the areas where we stayed. So like almonds, it's a big almond producing area, local honey, farm fresh eggs, oranges right off the trees, quince jam made from that citrus fruit. Just everywhere you
Fresh
turn.
figs. Oh my
Just,
God, the figs are to die for. Yeah, yeah.
right. And the table wines too. Like everybody knows about port, but I came home like an ambassador for Portuguese reds and whites. And like, have you tried this before? And people were like, no, I had no idea. And it's really up and coming. Yeah. The table
Now,
wines.
a few years ago, before COVID, there was actually a group of folks from the Boulder area that came to Portugal as a group, and they had such a fantastic time. And a couple of months later, they were revisiting the trip as a group and having a whole spread of the
Oh,
prosciutto and the wine and the port and the fig and everything that they experienced over Portugal at one of the individuals' homes in Boulder, and they invited me, so I came.
oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I happened to be in the area on business, and so that was part of the arrangement, was that I was going to be there. So we revisited Portugal all over again because they were so excited, had such a great time, and it was super fun to
Oh, that's
kind of
great.
reenact some of the meals, you know.
Yeah.
It is, it sounds absolutely incredible. I haven't had lunch yet, so it is very hungry. Well, now as we start, we are running a little bit low on time. We've talked about our accommodation, transportation, the incredible food that we are going to get on this trip. And honestly, if we just did those things, I am sure I would still have a absolutely amazing time, but I do think we should take a little bit of time and talk about some of the walks that we're going to be doing on this trip, and then touch a little bit on the presenters and the kayaking that we are going to take part in. So Nancy, do you want us to tell us a little bit on what the hikes are like? Some people call them walks, some people call them hikes. So tell us a little bit about the terrain and what we can expect there.
Sure. So most of the hikes that we're going to go on, first of all, are relatively short, and second, they're definitely more walks than hikes. You know, I would say it's there's probably some individuals on this call that have done walking tours before, and this is not dissimilar. I would say, generally speaking, we're out for 2 or 3 miles. And the terrain, as you can see here, is dirt roads, or walking through vineyards as they're picking, watching them pick, or cobblestone roads, as you see here. But it's not technically difficult. And so and it's about 2 or 3, as I said, 2 or 3 miles max, and and it's really not a walk for walk's sake, but a walk specifically to see something. For instance, the last morning, and when I do a walk out of Casa de la Voyage, at Casa de la Voyage, while we're there, because that little town sits on the top of a mountain, and as we've talked about, has a beautiful view, and we can walk all the way around that mountaintop as the sun is rising in the morning, and see the grapes, the shining sun against the grapes, and the beautiful color as the grape leaves start to turn as we move towards fall, and check out the little houses and some of the people picking oftentimes. So those are the types of walks that we do.
Fantastic. And then you mentioned that we will be meeting some locals. Tell us a little bit about the vineyard visits and what we can expect there.
So we have been able to not only establish relationships with our Portuguese friends that run the accommodations that we have, but we've also been able to establish relationships with many very small boutique wine type of wineries. We don't go to big establishments and watch big commercial productions. Instead, we have lunch or have dinner or have an experience watching picking in small vineyards and small producers, boutique producers who are producing really high quality wines and really high quality ports. And many of which you can't get in the United States. In fact, one of the big frustrations for some folks is that they can't ship some of what they taste back to the United States, and we've got it down to a science, so that at the closing dinner we hand out bubble wrap and tape, and we teach people how to pack wine into their suitcase to bring it back to the United States for them without it spilling. So but it's absolutely fabulous. So we have a lot of, almost everything we do is, again, in our small group, meeting with other small entities, not big, big tours. Even when we do a tour, let's say, for instance, at the opening dinner with Graham's at Graham's, which is a well-known port, we're doing the tasting and the touring privately and in a private room, and not just along with a host of other tourists. This is the Como Museum that we talked about. I think we may have mentioned this. The Coa Valley. It's one of the UNESCO heritage sites that we visit when we're there. And the Como Museum tells the story of a nomadic people that lived in this valley 25,000 years ago. And there are rock etchings, not cave paintings, but rock etchings throughout the valley that were discovered many years ago, and a museum was built. And so we have a good fortune of being able to go and do a private tour of that museum while we're there.
Fantastic. I truly love the diversity of this program. You would not think that you would be getting all of this in a trip to Portugal. And we haven't even gotten to one of the main highlights of the trip, which is kayaking. So now we are here. We are to the piece de resistance of the Nat Hab trip in Portugal, and that is a lot of opportunities for kayaking. So Nancy, you're obviously incredibly skilled professional kayaker. Can you tell us a little bit about what type of experience we need for these kayaking excursions, and yeah, what this truly feels like kayaking in Portugal?
Sure. So I would say that I am a passionate paddler. I'm just a water baby at heart. If it floats, generally speaking, I want to be on it, having grown up on the coast of Maine. But one of the things that I love about the kayak, especially, and I say this having traveled all over the world, both personally as well as an expedition leader, is that a kayak is a fantastic way to experience a culture and a place, no matter where I've gone, and Portugal is no exception. This is no exception, precisely because we can go places that we other people don't experience in the way that we do, because it's such a low impact, silent sport that's relatively easy to pick up. And the Douro River is a placid river. It used to be a crazy, wildly rapid river. And we'll hear more about that on the trip as well. But now, because of dams, it's a beautifully placid river, and it's a swimmable river. It's quite clean. I go swimming in it all the time. Most of the clients do, and we can get wind occasionally on the river, but if it gets windy, it's right in our face, so it actually is not difficult to paddle. And it's just a terrific, and I'm super excited to coach people along the way that have kayaked before if they want coaching. I switch people up if I'm happy to be in a tandem. If people want to paddle with me a day or two, I'll personally switch up as well. You know, my responsibility, obviously, when you're kayaking, this is a little bit different than other types of adventures. You know, it's important to keep everybody together on the river, right? That's part of my responsibility, is to make sure that everybody paddles safely as well as comfortably. And so, you know, we do what we need to do in order to make sure that that happens, that everybody gets the paddling experience. And as I said, I do a lot of coaching and teaching along the way, starting at day one. And we're paddling through vineyards, and we're picking. In fact, Wendy, you were talking earlier, right? You're right from the seat of your kayak.
Yeah, we go ashore. Yeah, like you pull off on the shore and step onto an empty bank and have a little stretch break or whatever, or picnic lunch, and you get up along some of the greenery like you see in the picture there to the right, and you all of a sudden you're underneath overhanging, low-hanging fruit. So you just reach up and you pick yourself an orange, or I guess maybe not an orange, but a quince I picked, and peach. Yeah, it was pretty fun.
Yeah, yeah. And the first day of kayaking is particularly spectacular in that it's an international park, that we are the only ones on the river. No one else is on the river, and we're the only ones there. And it's granite cliffs that soar 2,000 feet up in the air, and it forms the Spanish and Portuguese border.
Absolutely incredible. And so much so, thank you for that description of what the kayak experience is like. It is so incredible that even our founder, Ben Bressler, he's here with his wife, Laura.
That's right. And Ben is obviously working really hard here. I don't think either he didn't listen to my coaching lessons, or he wasn't, or, you know, he wasn't interested in them, because obviously Laura's doing the bulk of the work here. Ben's having, as usual, Ben's having too much fun. Yeah, and in fact, it's a perfect case in point, right? Wendy, you're not the only person from Nat Hab that's now been on this trip, as you know, and I'd safe to say that Ben and Laura were over the top, over the moon when they went on it as well, because again, they just didn't expect it. I used to say that Portugal was the best kept secret in Europe by Americans, and it's really not that way anymore, but the Douro River really still is. It hasn't changed much, again, because we get away from the crowds and the tourists.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nancy, for giving us more insight into this trip, and Wendy for your firsthand encounters. I know we are at the top of the hour, but I wanted to take a few quick minutes just from any questions that we might have, and I'll flip through a few additional photos of kayaking and eye candy as we take those questions. So Colby, is there any questions that we can answer?
Yeah, absolutely. We still have a lot of questions. Thank you, ladies. Before we start the Q&A, I would like to remind everyone you can submit your own questions via the questions field in your control panel. You know, it struck me as I was listening today, I'm not sure if you were all aware of it, but the word exquisite has come up repeatedly, and I really love that. I think that's just such a perfect word for this trip, and I'm reminded of all of these, you know, expeditions of yesteryear, you know, where we have American Louis Boyd and the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Charcot, and they would travel and they would do these incredible adventures that were often very physically demanding. They were out and, like, you know, doing things like paddling and kayaking, but at the end of the day, they'd bring out French wines and cheeses, and they'd dress up in their dresses, and, you know, just sort of celebrate where they were and what they were doing, and that they were all sharing in these experiences together. And I'm really struck by this trip, and that it has that that character to it. It's really unique in that way. So thank you for sharing. Getting to the question, sorry if that was self-indulgent, but I was really inspired. Let's go to kayaking questions. I think by far and away we have more kayaking questions for you, Nancy, than anything. So people a lot of people are just very directly asking if they have never kayaked before, can they go on this trip? And if so, what sort of training is required?
Absolutely. If you've never kayaked before, you can go on this trip because, again, in the beginning, I spend quite a bit of time on the first day. The first couple of days are our longest paddles, and and we have time to do those paddles with lunch, of course, in between. And I spend quite a bit of time coaching and instructing on that day. We've had lots of people that have no paddling experience or very limited paddling experience. If you can get out in a kayak before the trip.
We lost your voice. Nancy, we lost your audio again. Whoops.
Even if you can get out once or twice before the trip, if you have the opportunity, that helps, even if for the first time float, so it's not the very first time you've gotten in the boat. But I coach and instruct, as I said, on the first couple of days. In terms of helpful activities, I would say, again, getting out once or twice before the trip would be helpful. And also, if there's a way to do that, and also otherwise, just stretching, we stretch every morning before we take off down the river. And I'm really, I think that's really important to stretch, before you paddle. But I would say the primary activities would be to try to get yourself on the water once or twice before we go. Anything else? Any other tips you could recommend, Wendy?
Well, I would just add that overall, I think this trip, as far as paddling, was easier than the people in my group anticipated. I mean, as you can see from all these pictures, this is flat water. We don't go through rapids. The dams on the river have made it very calm. And if anything, it's pretty good exercise because you're not getting a lot of river current that's, rapidly carrying you down. I mean, the first couple of days, I could kind of feel it with these muscles that I didn't use regularly, but it wasn't hard. And the other good thing is when you're out there paddling for 3 to 5 hours or however long it is, you kind of earn those big dinners and all that wine. And I think at the end of the trip, I came very close to breaking even, but I might have gained a pound or two, even with all the paddling exercise.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. So I'm hearing that people do not need prior experience and that they can learn how to kayak when they're out there. We have some questions though about, exactly about the kayaks. Like, these are not the type of kayaks that Inuit are hunting seals from in the Arctic, and they need to know how to roll them, right? These are different. Can you tell us about these kayaks?
Yeah, so we have both singles and doubles for kayaks, and they're what would be considered sort of a hybrid, which is just to say that they're sort of a cross between what's typically known as a recreational boat, which is to say a kind of more wide open cockpit, and a sea kayak that would have that Inuit style tiny cockpit, that you would want to roll in or be able to roll in, if you will. Nobody has to roll during this trip. That we don't intend to get everybody wet, except for maybe just a splash of water to cool off. So we have both doubles and singles on this trip. It's one of the things that you'll talk about if you sign up for the trip is what kind of kayaking experience you're looking for. And I'm super proud of the fact that Natural Habitat has not only invested in more kayaks over time, but has also invested in fantastic paddles. Since we first started doing this trip, we had heavier paddles, and it was actually Ben that called me up one of the first years we were doing this trip together, and he said, I've heard the paddles that we have in Portugal are kind of heavy. Actually, I heard from a single client that it was like paddling with a 2x4 was what the comment that he made. Is that true? And I said, well, no, it's not paddling like with a 2x4, but they are kind of heavy. And he said, what will it cost me to get new paddles? And the rest is history, as they say. So we've invested in new paddles. We've invested in new life jackets, or PFDs, if you will, that are much more comfortable and made for paddling. So the whole paddling experience, just like the river, is comfortable in and of itself.
Okay, thanks. So I'm hearing we have state-of-the-art lightweight gear for everybody out there, and that the kayaks are touring kayaks where they can comfortably float down the lazy river without needing any extra skill. I think that covers most of our kayaking questions in terms of physicality. How much paddling per day are people actually doing? Like, what are these paddling excursions like? How swift is the river? Like I love that your nickname was the float and bloat, Nancy. How much floating are they doing versus actually paddling down the Douro River?
So the majority of the river, there's no current at all. And if there is any kind of current, because they've recently released, some dam water or something like that, that's where the current would come from. It's tiny and it would be behind us. So there isn't any current. In terms of mileage, the first couple of days are the longest days, and we paddle about 5 hours each of those days, split up, of course, with snacking and lunch over the course of the full day. And the rest of the days we're paddling just in the morning, and we like to start off in the morning because it's cooler and the river is quieter, and there's less. We don't see much other traffic on the river anyway, but it's certainly quieter in the morning. The pickers are out. If we're in harvest season, the pickers are out early in the morning for the same reason. It's cooler. They start picking as soon as the sun comes up or before the sun comes up, because in the middle of the day it can be super hot. So we tend to the rest of the trip we're paddling 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and then we're doing other activities in the afternoon.
Very good. That's a great question that leads, or a great answer that leads into the next question. What are the temperatures like throughout the day?
I would say generally that it's cool in the morning. It's not unusual for me to have a layer on. First thing in the morning, I might have a light fleece or a quick dry shirt on, my long sleeve Nat Hab shirt on in the morning. And by midday, it can be scorching. It can be quite hot, but not humid. This is a very, very dry heat. It's one of the reasons why it's such a spectacular place to grow grapes. The area gets rain in the spring, in the winter and spring, and then from July all the way through to the beginning of October, it rarely sees a drop. So it's super dry.
Just getting in that river too. If you got too warm, just hop out, and cool down, and just in and out. It was really fun.
Right. That's right. We've been known to use our water pumps on our kayaks as water guns too. So for good measure. So yeah, and when I say scorching, I mean in the 90s. Again, a dry 90s, sometimes in the 80s, 90s. Again, we're on the river, we're taking breaks, we're drinking water, we're taking swims, etc.
Okay, well, ladies, thank you very much. We are about 15 minutes past the hour, so we'll call the Q&A. I will remind everyone that if you have additional questions about our Portugal trip, please feel free to reach out via email or call your adventure specialist in our office, and they'll be happy to answer any lingering questions that you might have. Ladies, shall we throw it back to you for some closing comments before the end of our presentation? Renata, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, for those that are, thank you, Colby. Thank you, Nancy and Wendy. I love learning more about this itinerary, and I'm excited to go at some point. For those of you that are signed up for this trip coming up soon, I hope you have an absolutely wonderful time. And for those who were just tuning in to hear more about it, I hope you consider signing up. It is really an incredible and intimate journey, and I'm sure you will enjoy traveling with Nancy and experiencing Portugal.
Great. Well, I want to start by thanking Wendy for jumping in, Wendy, because I asked you if you'd join in today as somebody who has experienced it as a traveler. But I also want to thank everybody, of course, who's listening, and especially those who are coming. I can't wait to meet you if you've signed up already. I look forward to meeting you in a very short period of time here, this season or next, and sharing this beautiful valley and this beautiful culture with you. I know that you'll get hooked on Portugal like I am. I almost bought property in Portugal. I fell so much in love with it. I can't get enough of it. So, and you know, we just love this trip, and my brothers and I love sharing it with people. So I look forward to seeing you, and certainly encourage others to look at it. I'm always happy to answer questions. Super fun, super fun. And I think a wonderful way to travel. So thanks for listening today.
Yeah. And go now, go soon, because you know there are fewer and fewer places in the world that aren't really getting overly discovered and over touristed, and the Instagrammers have not discovered the Upper Douro yet. So get there before they do.
Yeah. Good point.
Okay, well, thanks to the three of you once again. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in with us today. Join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. And you can check out this week's lineup, as always, including our registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website shortly. And with that, I will conclude today's webinar. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.